Yeah, so Catherine lost her husband, Andy Gill, recently, who was the guitarist in Gang of Four. So a huge post-punk icon, whether you're familiar with his music or not. And he passed away. And in the last few months, although he wasn't diagnosed at the time, Catherine's been on this really probably heartbreaking and incredible journey trying to piece together what really happened to him and whether or not he was an early British victim of the coronavirus.
The coronavirus newscast from the BBC.
What is this virus? How does it spread? How do we protect ourselves and our loved ones?
I got some test results back for coronavirus and it came back positive.
We're just kind of trying to feel our way into this new normal.
I must level with the British public. More families, many more families are going to lose loved ones before their time.
Relax, we're doing great. It all will pass.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in a different studio. Professor Tom, can we bring you in from listening to that? What's your take? And I should stress this to people listening, we're not trying to get you to give an official diagnosis of what happened or not. But from how Catherine's been able to piece it together, what do you make of it?
Well, it's such a sad story, isn't it, of Andy dying like this. And it must have been really, I'm sure it's been really hard for Catherine, especially not knowing what the cause was and then all of this other stuff going on. But I mean, the key question I guess Catherine wants to know is, could this have been the coronavirus, COVID-19? And I think the simple answer is yes, it could have been. You know, a lot of the information that she's put together, we now know the virus was around longer. The viruses are always around before you spot them. They're always around for a while before they start to cause large number of cases. And I think the indication is that there were low levels of virus transmission in China before they even realised they had a problem. So I think the timing fits. And we also now know that a lot of these other symptoms, which originally didn't seem to be so important, things like loss of smell, loss of taste, those have now been recognised. Loss of smell has now been recognised by Public Health England as a symptom for coronavirus infection. Conjunctivitis also we've seen that in patients, and it may well be that's a sign of infection as well. So I think putting the whole thing together, it's possible. You can't prove it at this stage, of course. If it was possible to get the blood of the band manager, that could be tested even now to see has he had infection. And indeed, Catherine's blood could be tested. But of course, you're not going to know then. If somebody's had infection, you won't quite know when they had it and whether it all fits the story together. But it would certainly be additional evidence, I think.
Yeah, I mean, several things. One is, I mentioned this idea that there was a very fast incubation period, the mean incubation period, 5 days. There now have been quite a lot of stories, including from Wuhan, where the lockdown was very severe. A man there went into lockdown and didn't develop symptoms for 27 days afterwards. So the timelines would work for Andy, because I know that he was ill in December. Him being ill in December raises all sorts of questions for me on a personal level, including the fact that my stepfather also died on the 22nd of December. And although he had incurable illnesses, COPD and blood cancer, but he wasn't expected to die. And he died very suddenly, and the cause of death on his death certificate is hospital-acquired pneumonia. So on a personal level, there is this question about what could this actually mean? But the main reason that for me it felt important to try and get answers here, and the tour manager is absolutely ready to do serology tests, and so am I. And St. Thomas's also has been able to locate some samples from Andy that they might be able to test, to do the serology tests on. They did test one sample and that was negative, a liquid sample from the lung, but they said that didn't prove anything anyway, because he'd been ill for so long at that point. By the time he came into hospital, it is very likely that the virus would have actually left the body but triggered this immune response. So unfortunately, that's not an answer of itself anyway.
No, but if they've got a blood sample, they might be able to test that. And again, if that is positive for the antibody, that means that he certainly had infection at some time. And given how poorly he was, And that the illness
Yes.
also actually sounds like it might have been coronavirus. I think you said he was the healthiest person on the intensive care unit, and that's quite typical. People are relatively well, and then they can suddenly go downhill quite fast, and that sounded like what happened with Andy. So I think this detective story is not quite finished yet, because I think there is scope to do a little bit more work to try and put the other pieces of the jigsaw together.
And just what I was trying to say about why I think it's an important detective story and why I decided to go public with it at all is because for me it also has these huge public health response implications, because that suggestion that that it came here to Europe earlier and that it may well be far wider spread and far more asymptomatic cases, and in terms of what the basis on which modelling is being done.
Yes.
All of that to me seems really urgently important going forward. So although I know that people will think that this is about me kind of trying to make sense of something you can't make sense of, I'm not doing that.
No, I think it's more than that. But also, I think anyone who's bereaved is perfectly within their rights to try and understand what's happened. I mean, I see patients all the time where they want to know why somebody's died and what exactly has happened. And, I think that's justification in itself. But like you say, it does, just through this one example. And I've talked to many people with similar examples where they had symptoms that now they realise they might have been symptoms of coronavirus. Even myself, my daughter and myself in early March both had a dry cough. This was before at that stage we were told isolate if you've got a persistent cough. But hers was just in the morning and the evenings. Mine was really just a sore throat. So I think all of us have these questions about, have I had the infection and what's the transmission been? And in fact, just on the coronavirus newscast, I think it was last week, I was saying that, I think potentially even up to half the population have already been exposed to the virus. And that, of course, has massive implications going forwards, big public health implications. So I think you're right, all of these are important factors.
But Catherine, and forgive me for putting it this way, but even if we do get all the answers to your questions, it doesn't change what happened in January and February. I mean, what difference would it make to how we handle this crisis for the rest of the year or next year?
I think it has really big implications in terms of this whole question about how vitally important testing and tracing is as a way to come out of lockdown. It has retrospective implications in terms of how very bad some of the calls were here in terms of not pursuing that testing and tracing. But I think if you understand that this has been around for longer, and if you understand that lots of people are asymptomatic or have only minor symptoms in the way that if I turn out to have had it, I would have done, it does mean that you approach this differently and that you also put the right information into the modelling. The garbage in, garbage out issue here remains just as acute as ever. I also, by the way, it's not just retrospective in terms of public health decisions here. It is also about trying to figure out, amid all these ridiculous conspiracy theories, how the virus actually emerged and where and when.
I think there are also implications for how we think about future outbreaks of infectious diseases, which will continue to happen, hopefully not on the scale of this one. But we do have emerging infections that come every few years. And perhaps the lessons from Catherine's story and stories like hers are that we should be more circumspect at the beginning of outbreaks about what the symptoms look like, what the transmission patterns might be, how long people can be infectious for. We tend to operate just on the information we have. And to some extent, you can only do that. But we probably should allow for greater margins of error and say, OK, currently we think this. But if actually, if you can carry the virus for longer, if the symptoms can be milder, what will the implications be for helping us to control it?
Professor Tom, thank you so much. I mean, there's clearly just already so much that people have learned in these few short months, but clearly going to be so much to learn in future. Thank you so much for helping us and listening to Catherine being so amazingly candid. But Catherine, just before we say goodbye to you, I think want to end with something about your other half, something about Andy. Can